Good evening to all of you who are present over the other side of this virtual platform. So once again, we are here with a renowned academician and professor from University of Nottingham, Malaysia. And on behalf of the Department of English, Midnapore College, I extend you a hearty welcome for today's talk to be delivered by Professor Malachi Edwin Vethamani, who is going to talk on Malaysian Indian writers in English, Emergence and Evolution. So before he formally begins, as it's a regular exercise of our department to introduce our resource persons to our dear participants, and he has his long illustrious career. It would take a lot of time, but I'm just trying to sum up in these few words. Malachi Edwin Vethamani, sir, is a professor, poet, writer, critic, editor, and bibliographer. He is currently head of the School of English at University of Nottingham, Malaysia. He is a widely published author, academic. He is the recipient of the Shivani Award in 1993 and Fulbright Scholarship, and his latest award is the Vice Chancellor Achievement Medal, University of Nottingham, that he received in 2019. His publications include Coiters, Interrupters, and Other Stories, two collection of poems, Life Happens and Complicated Lives. He published an edited volume of Malaysian poems entitled Malachi Testament, Malaysian Poems, which covers a period of 60 years. His latest publication is an edited volume of short stories entitled Wronging. Sir will pronounce the word later. Malaysian short stories. A bibliography of Malaysian literature in English is his documentation of Malaysian literature in English since 1950s till 2015. So on behalf of the Department of English, Midnapore College, I welcome you, sir, to this virtual platform, to this online lecture series that is being organized by the Department of English, Midnapore College. Thank you, sir. So over to you.
Thank you. Okay. Just quick question. How do we share the screen? Okay. Right. I'm not sure whether you can see me now.
You are visible, but in this case, you will not be able to see the other side. So it would not be a problem. So you can carry on. If there's a problem, I will just notify you that you got disconnected. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. So very good evening, and I would like to thank you all for attending this webinar this evening. I would like to start by thanking the staff at the Department of English in Midnapore College, especially Mr. Tanmoy Kundu, the Assistant Professor and Head of the Department of English, for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here today, and I hope that you find this a useful session, and that at the end of my lecture there will be some questions which I'm quite happy to answer. So the title of my paper is Malaysian Indian Writers in English, Emergence and Evolution. I'll start by looking at the map of this part of Asia, which has got on my left the South Asian continent of India, and towards the right you see the Southeast Asian side, and you can see Malaysia and Malaysia, which is actually two sections. One is the peninsular part of which is called Malaysia, and then there's another part in Borneo. So you could see that even from this map, that from earliest time, the waterways gave access for Indians to move towards Malaysia, and therefore contact started very early. Yeah. So what I'll do is give a little bit of a historical account so that we kind of contextualize how the Indian presence or the Indian diaspora in Malaysia began. So the migration of Indians to Malaysia began in Asian times, and there is evidence of this in the Bujang Valley in Kedah, in the Malay Peninsula. There are still some temples there, and it remains now an archaeological site. So the Indian presence in Malaya, and which later then became to known as Malaysia, started very much around AD 110, and with that began the waves of Indian arrival into the Malay Peninsula. So the early travelers who came to the Malay Peninsula were very much those who came in for trade. This was especially in the pre-British colonial period. And you will notice that, the trade relations with the Malacca Sultanate, and this was very much Indians coming to trade and going back to India, not many settling here. The next wave of big migration of Indians to Malaysia, and the word migration would probably be more appropriate because this is when Indians came to Malaya, and many of them stayed on. Now, thousands of Indians were brought in as indentured or contract workers, largely from Tamil Nadu. And then in the 1900s, there was more demand for laborers to work in municipal services and other construction that was required in the rather fast developing Malaya because of the industry of the rubber and tin industries. So, and then in the 20th century, you have Indians coming into British Malaya voluntarily. These were people who had some education, unlike the earlier indentured laborers who were in various plantations. The later wave of Indians that came in the 20th century were those who were seeking greener pastures. The earlier Indians were largely from Tamil Nadu and therefore of Tamil origin. I am also of Tamil origin. And the later ones who came in were from other parts of India, especially the Malayalis from Kerala. So if you look at this slide that I've just displayed, you will notice the population of Malaysia. This is statistics from 2019. You will notice that there are 4 broad categories. You have the Bumiputra, the Chinese, the Indians, and others. Now, race is a label that is generally problematic, and even more so, I would think, in Malaysia. Now, the population in Malaysia is broadly categorized into 2 groups, Bumiputra and non-Bumiputra. Bumiputra refers to the indigenous races, the Malays and the indigenous races, and all other racial groups are called non-Bumiputra. So I'm an Indian, and therefore I would fall under the category of non-Bumiputra. Now, there's a clear demarcation between the Bumiputra and non-Bumiputra population, And this is enshrined in the Malaysian Constitution. And therefore, there's this clear distinction between who is Bumiputra and who is not. Now, if we then begin to look at Indians in Malaysia, so who is an Indian in Malaysia? Of course, we are the second largest diaspora in Malaysia. The largest would be the Chinese diaspora. Now, if we want to consider the label Indian, we could have a rather inclusive label which takes into consideration the whole of the Indian subcontinent and those from the island of Sri Lanka. So this would be those from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka. I have highlighted Pakistan and Bangladesh because a lot of the migrants who come from Pakistan and Bangladesh are of Muslim origin, and therefore they would, if they practice the Malay customs, they would be considered Bumiputra, and therefore would not fall in the category of non-Bumiputra. Again, that happens over a period of time. So religion is something that is a factor in, or one of the main factors, because a Malay is one who is Muslim in Malaysia. So we then begin to think about this whole idea of being Indian. What is your nationality? What is your ethnicity? So is one Malaysian Indian or Indian Malaysian? I describe myself as a Malaysian Indian, having been born in Malaysia, Malaya, yeah, and then having a Malaysian nationality, but I'm of Indian descent. So generally, it is this idea of how you balance your nationality and your ethnicity. So the Indians in Malaysia make up of the 7% of the population of 27 million Malaysians. And for the purpose of this paper, the label Indians refers to non-Bumiputra, that is Indians from the subcontinent and Sri Lanka, and also those who are of mixed parentage. I have in brackets Chindian meaning children who are mixed of Chinese and Indian descent, children of mixed parentage. Okay, so I will now look at the emergence of Malaysian writing in English, and my focus here is writing in English. There was obviously writing in other languages, but today we will be looking at Indians writing in English in Malaysia. So Malaysian writing in English emerged through the writing of the university undergraduates at the University of Malaya, which was then in Singapore. Their creative writing was published in students' literary journals. The Literary and Debating Society of King Edward VII Medical College Union published what was called the Cauldron. And later, when University of Malaya was formed in Kuala Lumpur in 1949, the Cauldron was transferred to the university's Raffles Society, and it took the name of New Cauldron. So you'll see that the early writings were very much those of young people writing, undergraduates writing at the university. That was the genesis of writing. And that was young people writing from different ethnicity. Among them, there were Indian writers. Now, the English language, Malaya and later Malaysia being part of the British colonial influence, this resulted in our education system having a very strong English presence. So the English language was initially both the medium of instruction and it was also taught as a language. Now, this continued till about the 1960s. Um, we had a rather significant event, which we describe as the 13th May 1969 riots. The education system in Malaysia, as a result of this riots, there was dramatic changes. And one of the changes that came about was that the national language, the Malay language, became the medium of instruction, and English was taught as a second language. And what happens as a result, the language was less used throughout the country, but in some of the urban places, English language became the language of communication. It was the lingua franca in a lot of the urban areas. So English, although it was no longer the medium of instruction, continued to be used because people valued it had currency as a language, especially for international communication. Now, because the language continued to be used, it came in contact with the local languages, and as such, a distinct variety of English, known as Malaysian English, emerged in Malaysia. We could say that it emerged from the 1950s, and I mentioned that there was contact with the local languages, and therefore the English language went through a process of acculturation, where elements from the local languages came into the English language, and some of the foreign cultural elements which was present in the English language, or what the British English language, went through a process of deculturation, and as such, what we have now would be described as a new variety of English, known as Malaysian English, and that became the medium for creative expression in Malaysia. Now, although it might seem as if the language was terribly distinct, there was obviously standard Malaysian English is very close to standard British English, but there are other elements that we consider in Malaysian English, especially in the spoken variety and in creative writing. A lot of this comes into presence, and probably I'll indicate this as we go along. So when we talk about Malaysian English and Malaysian literature in English, Malaysian literature in English as a new literary tradition, we could say that it emerged, the early years were from the 1950s to the 1960s. I've mentioned 1970s to 1980s as the turbulent years as a result of the 1969 riots, which then, there was a strong sense of anti-English, and there's a lot of promotion of the national language. As such, writing in English did not have much support. Sometimes it was viewed as a colonial relic. And so this was a time when writers had to think very much whether they wanted to use English for their creative writing. However, post 1980s, from 1990s onwards, I've described these as the re-emerging years when English began to take a life of its own. More people began to write in English, and as such, what some people thought might be the end of Malaysian writing in English did not happen, and as such, the literary tradition has continued to grow, and I believe writing in English will be something that we can see in the future. So now, if you look at the Malaysian Indian writer, and looking at, I've described Malaysian writing in English. Here, I would like to consider the Indian writer's presence in Malaysian literature in English. And this can be traced to the 1950s. And among the forerunners or people who were the prominent writers of that time, were people like Lloyd Fernando and T. Vignason. Lloyd Fernando, I will talk more about Lloyd Fernando in the coming slides. T. Vignason was an important presence in Malaysian writing in English. He was responsible for putting together the first anthology of Malaysian writing, which had not only English but other languages in this anthology, known as the Bunga Emas. I believe it was out of print for a while now. It's available again. So after Fernando and Vignason, we had writers like K.S. Maniam and Cecil Rajendra and a few others who came into the forefront of Malaysian writing in English. And then from the 1990s, you see a new generation of writers beginning to publish in English. And this was also possible because of the increasing opportunities in publishing that was now available to these young writers. So when we look at the writings of Fernando and Maniam, when they started writing, and especially writing in a language like the English language, which was a minority language, this has been described as a minority discourse. I think it's important to bear in mind that much of the writing, the literature in Malaya at that time was very much in the Malay language. And therefore, when writing in English emerged, then what we had now is what has been described as minority discourse, because people were writing in a language which was a minority language, and there was a reversal in the role, in the sense that these writers now changed the role of subject and object, the observer and the observed. Once the Indians and the others were the observed, now they had become the observers, and the others were becoming the object of their observation, the notion of the namer and the named. And therefore, this became available in the public domain. So people were looking at writing which had Indian protagonists and probably characters from the other races also in these new writing. And what Rushdie describes this phenomena as as shouting across to the dominant culture the different perceptions of their mutual world. So here we now have Indian writers writing about life in Malaya, and it's coming from their point of view, and it's being written in a minority language. So this was the early experience of Indian writers. And this continues to be so for a while till writing in English becomes mainstream, when writers from other races also begin to write in English, not just about their own ethnic concerns, but the literary canvas becomes broader, and other issues besides their own individual ethnic issues are being addressed. So if you look at what I've identified are some of the preoccupations of Malaysian Indian writers, and it's very much centered around these elements that I've identified: race in terms of ethnicity, looking at equality. We talked about racial inequality in some aspects of Malaysian life, place in the new society, Indians finding themselves in Malaya and the new environment, and how do they negotiate it, displacement and belonging, where one begins to think of Malaya as home and India as an ancestral home, probably with cultural links, with a new sense of belonging to this land, whether that emerges or whether that remains something that needs to be cultivated over a few generations. And therefore, there's also quite closely linked to this notion of identity, I talked about being Malaysian Indian or Indian Malaysian. So these notions of nationality, ethnicity, language, and religion become something that we consider. The other issue is that of looking at family. Patriarchy, Indian families tend to have very strong patriarchal presence, patriarchal practices, and therefore other issues related to gender and equality and women issues. And later, the canvas became even broader. Indian writers began to think about and write about environmental issues, about the urban and rural divide. There was this idea about the Indians in the estates and the Indians in the city, in the urban areas, idea of heritage and conservation wherever they were, climate change, gentrification of the landscape. As urbanization took place, Indians, whether they were displaced, was also a concern. Political issues of social justice in the 1990s and then in the 21st century also, there were other issues, the new immigrants and refugees that arrived in our shores. Gender and sexuality was being explored, especially those related to LGBTQ issues. Yeah. So, having talked about the preoccupations and the kind of concerns that Malaysian writers have, I'd like to now talk about some of these writers and what they presented. It's quite difficult to cover quite a lot in this 45-minute talk, but I will give a very comprehensive take so that you get a taste of what the Malaysian Indian writers were writing about since the 1950s. The two forerunners are two men who actually brought Malaysian English into the literary map, literary world map, Lloyd Fernando and K.S. Maniam. Fernando, both these men have now passed on. We lost K.S. Maniam earlier this year. Now, Lloyd Fernando was an academic. He worked in the University of Malaya. He's recognized as a critic. He did a lot of important editorial work. He was responsible in bringing together two collections of short stories and two collections of Malaysian plays. He himself is a novelist, a short story writer, and a playwright. His novels, Scorpion Orchid and Green is a Color, are modern classics of Malaysian writing in English. Now, this is what Muhammad Qayyum says of Fernando. He says, Fernando paved the way for the growth of literary activity in English by introducing courses in Commonwealth literature and creative writing in the curriculum of University of Malaya. He is one who's responsible for, in many ways, encouraging young students to quell the anxieties that English was a colonial relic and considered as a stable artistic medium. This is something that I said that in the 1970s, there was a lot of concern about writing in English. Fernando not only wrote in English, he also was a very competent user of the national language. And in writing in English, he says that a writer is not free to choose his language and could write in one in which he not only thinks but also feels in the depths of his being. Very often the language chooses us, and therefore we write in that language. In the case of K.S. Maniam, he is probably the most prolific writer. Now, he was an academic also in the University of Malaya. He was a critic, a novelist, short story writer, playwright, poet. His focus was very much on the Malaysian Indian writers, though in his later writings, Maniam did write about other non-Malay characters, but his focus was generally on the ethnic Indian. And Shivani Patricia Gabriel in the obituary to K.S. Maniam says this, and I'll just read the first part. To his detractors, Maniam was too immersed in the ethnic Indian perspective and failed to draw attention to Malaysia's multicultural realities. He wrote a lot about the Indians, especially those in the plantations. He was concerned about their dreams, their prejudices. So in many ways, Maniam's work is recognized as one which focused on the ethnic Indian. He won the Rajarao Award for his contribution to the Indian diaspora. So he was recognized both in Malaysia and internationally, and it was good that he received the Rajarao Award from India. Now, I'm going to look at the different genres and mention some of the key contributors in this area. So we're looking at Malaysian Indian novelists. So the first Malaysian Indian woman writer, I should say, first Malaysian Indian women novelist was Marie Garina Lewis. To date, she has 3 novels, and her novels again deal very much with women's issues. I will not be talking in detail. I'll be highlighting these writers and some of their concerns. Now, Marie Garina Lewis, in her 3 works, especially the first, was very much concerned with the kind of the treatment of women and what her protagonist experiences. Rani Maneka's novel, The Rice Mother, which was published in 2002, went on to become the winner of the Commonwealth Prize, Writers' Prize in 2003 for Southeast Asia and Pacific region. Again, this novel is an epic novel set from the 1920s to 2001. It covers a wide period. There's and it's important again in the sense that it presents to us how an Indian family experiences their movement from Sri Lanka to Malaya, the various arranged marriages, the attempts to survive these various trying situations. There is quite a lot of reference to the Second World War. The third novelist I have in this slide, Shamini Flint. Now, she is probably the most successful crime fiction novelist in Malaysia. She has a series called Inspector Singh Investigates, and she's been publishing since 2009, and in 2016 she published the 7th novel in this series. Shamini Flint is also one who writes for children and also young adult literature. The next 3 writers that I have highlighted in this screen are Brian Gomez, Prita Samarasan, and Bernice Choli. Now, Brian Gomez's novel, The Devil's Place, is a humorous and fast-paced detective novel. It is satirical, it is wicked, and it's certainly a fun novel to read. Prita Samarasan's novel, Evening is the Whole Day, published in 2008, won the Avery and Jules Hopwood Novel Award. It was shortlisted for the 2009 Commonwealth Prize for Best First Book, again in the Southeast Asian region. This novel is a very important contemporary novel. It presents to us a family very much caught up in their own private lives, and at the same time, the public space is also explored. One of the main events in this novel is also around the May 13th event. And she presents to us how one of the characters, Suresh, his birth is on the 13th, it is during that event itself. And she very artistically presents to us this. I will just read a few lines from a book. She says, "Impossible to say, but 3 days after the election, rumor and fact burst forth into the noonday Kuala Lumpur heat. Rumor in a red dress, fact in coat and tails. Together they began a salacious tango in the streets." She creates these two characters and how both rumor and fact become blurred even as she examines the 13th May incident. The third novelist in this slide is Bernice Choli. And Bernice Choli's novel, Once We Were There, published in 2017, again has won a couple of prizes. It's an important novel which is set in the 1990s, very much part of the setting is very much part of the what has been described as the Reformasi movement. At a time, it was very much a political movement trying to unseat the then government, which has been in power since independence. Besides looking at the political situation, she also brings in quite a lot of other issues like sex, drugs, issues related to child trafficking. So she raises some very important points in this novel. The last two Indian novels I'm going to talk about are from Sandeep Ray and Sri Devi Iyer. A Flutter in the Colony, published in 2019, is an interesting novel. It talks about migration, and Sri Devi's Iyer's novel, The Tiniest House of Town, also talks about movement and migration. So these two novels present to us quite an interesting scope on the movement of people, of Indians, basically. Yeah. In the case of Sandeep Ray's novel, is very much set from the 1950s in Calcutta. He very interestingly juxtaposes what's happening in the partition of Bengal and independence in Malaya. Sri Devi Iyer's novel is very much a transnational novel set in Burma, Malaya. It moves on to Hong Kong and Australia. It's a novel that I have not read but have read about, but I certainly enjoyed Sandeep Ray's novel, A Flutter in the Colony. Well, we're going to look at Malaysian Indian poets. There have been many Malaysian poets, Malaysian poets who have contributed to anthologies and magazines, and some have gone on to publish their own collections. Cecil Rajendra is probably the most prolific poet. He's a lawyer and a social activist, and this is reflected in his poetry. Cecil's first collection was in 1965. He went on to publish 15 volumes of poems. Very controversial writer, and because of his stand and his and what he writes, he even had his passport once confiscated, but he after a while it was returned to him. He's a free man, but continues to write on social issues which are very relevant to Malaysian life. The next person that I have in this list is Bernice Choli. Bernice Choli is an educationist. She's an activist, a feminist. She has 4 volumes of poems which deal with issues related to women's writing, women's concern. She presents both the private and the personal world, and also there is a very strong public canvas in her writing. I have 2 volumes of poetry published in 2016 and 2017. I won't talk about my own writing. Someone else can do that. The next person I want to mention is Melissa Rani T. Salva. Melissa Rani is a very successful spoken word poet of international recognition. Yeah, she brings up issues which are related to both women and to herself as an Indian woman. Now, in this slide, I highlight 6 poets who have individual collections. Charlene Rajendran in 1999 published Mangosteen Crumble. You can see the whole idea of hybridity in the title of the collection itself. She writes about patriarchy, women's rights, and on conservation. Sexing Coffee by Elizabeth Marshall in 2014 is one of the first books to be published as a ebook. Again, her verse is interesting. She writes poetry. She has ghazals and various forms. Certainly an interesting read. Then Melissa T. Rani in 2015 published her collection called Taboo. And this is very much poetry of spoken word poetry, and certainly one which young readers find very attractive. Next, we have Susan Rajendra, who this collection, The Personal and Profane, is like his collected works. They cover his 50 over years of writing. Then that's my collection, and Bernice Choli's latest collection of poems. Again, there are many Malaysian Indian writers. I have given you a list of names to indicate the range of writers. Here I will talk about some of them in a while. Again, when we talk about the Malaysian short story writer, K.S. Maniam emerges as the most prolific Malaysian short story writer. His first collection was in 1989, and he went on to publish his last collection in 2018. After 2006, there was a break of 12 years, and then his final volume of short stories emerged. Again, as mentioned earlier, his focus was very much on the Indians in Malaysia. Now, here I highlight 2 writers, Prita Samarasan and Saraswati Manikam. Saras does not have a collection of her own work yet. She has many short stories. She's won a number of awards, and in 2019 she was the Asian regional winner for the 2019 Commonwealth Short Story Prize. And her work is published by Granta. It's available if you just type in Saraswati Manikam, My Mother Part 2. Again, very much concerned with women's issues, family relations, patriarchal society. Yeah, and Prita Samarasan's short story, A Rightful Share, won the Asian American Award. And this poem, A Rightful Share, discusses various issues related to social justice. These are another 3 sets of Malaysian writers from 2011, 2013, 2017. We have Shivani Sivan, who created her own little fictional space called Coral Island. And here she presents various issues. She raises various issues through the interactions between the flora, fauna, and the human beings. A very interesting take on issues and our interconnectivity with the animal world, as it were. Paul Nyonaselvam's collection, Lata's Christmas, again, is a collection of stories. His works are quite reminiscent of K.S. Maniam's work. Most of his writing centers around Indians, and he raises issues about migration, belonging. Sri Devi Iyer's 2017 collection, A Jungle Without Water, again, is a very interesting collection dealing with movement, dealing with issues of belonging. She also does a lot of experiments with the language. Her use of non-standard Malaysian English in narration is quite innovative, something that Prita Samarasan also does in her short story. The next three short stories are from Jesse Michael, myself, and M. Shanmughalingam. Jesse Michael writes very much about the ordinary man. She brings up various issues about death, loss, alienation, and Marriage and Mutton Curry from M. Shanmughalingam is an interesting collection of stories, very humorous. He seems to be very much caught up with the Jaffna Tamils pre-independence, and also very much in the 1950s and 1960s period. A fun read, bringing out the quirks in the Jaffna Tamil society. Now, besides the other broad genres, I also felt that I would like to highlight two important pieces of work from Shore to Shore and Growing Up, because these are two important memoirs or autobiographies. Mutamal Grant presents to us what it meant for the earlier generation of women and how her movement from India to Malaysia, she captures quite a very, she documents a very important time in Malaysian life, of especially of Indian women, and I think how she had to survive the challenges that she had to go through. And in Bernice Choli's Growing Up with Ghosts, we have Bernice exploring her loss of her father. It's and how she goes through the whole process of coming to terms with his death, going back to India to look at her roots. Very interesting lyrical piece of writing. Now, I started talking about Malaysian writing, talking about how K.S. Maniam and Lloyd Fernando were the leading lights of that time. And I felt that I would like at this point to look ahead. And I think Bernice Choli is of mixed parentage, of Chinese and Indian parentage. She's a prolific writer, as you can see. She has 4 volumes of poetry, a volume of short stories, a memoir, a novel. I believe she's beginning to write her next novel. Her writing spans from 1997 to 2017. I look at Bernice as one we will see more writing coming from. Besides other writers who I've mentioned, I think she's one of, I see her as a leading light in the community. Although I would hate to label or put people into racial categories, Malaysia is a nation that seems to force us into it. And therefore, in terms of the Indian diaspora, I believe that there will be many more Indian writers, and it's interesting that Bernice is of mixed parentage, of Chinese and Indian parentage. It makes Malaysia all the more exciting, I think. So looking ahead, I think the English language will be one of the main mediums of creative expression for Malaysian Indian writers. There are Malaysian Indians who write in the Malay language, and of course in the various Indian languages also. Yeah, and these writers, I believe, will continue to contribute to the growth of Malaysian English as a variety of English. and also to Malaysian literature in English. And of course, the position of the Malaysian English position of the literary tradition and of the writers is very much going to be dictated by language policies and politics. I've not gone very much into that because within this 45 minutes, I had attempted to give you a quick overview of Malaysian writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for this early research, exhaustive and informative presentation on Indian Malaysian writers. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you. But is there a question?
Okay. So now it's time for the questions. So I will request our participants, if they have any questions, so they can drop them down in the comment section, and therefore I will convey them. I will bring them out to you. Now there is a questions from Shutama Roy. So you can see the question on your screen. I've just made it visible to your screen.
Can we call the process of intermingling of cultures as creolization? No, this is not really creolization. Firstly, I'm not sure what you mean by creolization, because creolization seems to suggest that it is not a legitimate language. Malaysian English is recognized as a new variety of English. It has its standard variety and the various non-standard forms. Thank you for that question.
So waiting for other questions.
Sure.
If there is any questions from the other participants.
Well, while we wait for a question, I would like to, because someone asked about the language, I would like to read to you a passage from Lord Fernando's Scorpion Orchid, which talks about the different languages. Yeah, it says, here he said, one of the characters says, he's a Eurasian character, he says, I was born in Malacca speaking Portuguese. That's because the Portuguese colonized us so many hundred years ago. The Dutch didn't stay long enough, so I suppose it's a toss-up. I would be speaking Dutch instead. Anyway, the result was no one outside understood the Portuguese I spoke. Then, because the British had ousted the Dutch, I learned English and forgot my Portuguese. It was like taking out the parts and organs of my body and replacing them with others. Then the Japs came and we were told, forget English, learn Japanese. For once more, I began taking out parts and putting in new ones, unlearning my language and learning another. Now it seems I must unlearn it once more and learn Malay, he said passionately. What I want to say, Sabran, is this. I've gone through the process so many times, I can't anymore. So I think that question actually brings out the various processes that we have gone through. Okay, the question is, multiculturalism very much the focus of Malaysian Indian writers in English? I think this idea, okay, firstly, I would like to say that the earlier writers probably focused very much on the Indian characters. If you look at writers like Lloyd Fernando, he certainly had multicultural characters in Scorpion Orchid and also in Green is the Color. Now, in the case of Maniam, he tends to write about Indians. A lot of us who write seem to write from our societies, our own backgrounds. But when it comes to issues that concern us, so maybe when it comes to poetry, and in some short stories, you'll find that certain writers do have multicultural characters. and therefore the canvas is a bit broader, and there is presence of characters from other races. But I believe that very often the protagonists tend to be of Indian origin. If you look at some of the stories, for example, Paul Yanusalvam has a couple of stories in his collection in which you have Chinese characters, and there's interaction with other characters. And so, uh, I don't think there's a deliberate attempt on multiculturalism, but it depends on the context of the story and the kind of people who are involved in it. So it could result in having multicultural characters and raising various multicultural issues. Thank you for that question. Shall we call the identity as a paradox of being and becoming a Malaysian? Well, it's not as much as a paradox as coming to terms. I think it's a process of growing into acceptance that one is Malaysian, and there are certain things uh, that means to be Malaysian. For example, I live in this country, I respect its laws, I participate in these various Malaysian activities, but that does not mean that I'm less Indian. Yeah. So I think one needs to recognize that you can be culturally Indian at the same time have various Malaysian values in terms of respecting each other's cultural practices, beliefs, and so our identities may still remain essentially Indian or Chinese. There's also a lot of intermingling, the mixing of races, as we saw in the case of the writer Bernice Jolie. There are also other writers of mixed descent, not just with Malaysian, Chinese, and Indians, but also from the Malays. How do you view those Indians who migrate to Malaysia from different provinces of India? Can we homogenize their writing or experience? Now, I certainly do not want to homogenize the writing and experiences. I think they're all individual experiences. They bring different dimensions. So, for example, just now we talked, I mentioned M. Shanmugalingam's short stories, which project quite a lot of Jaffna Tamils, their social values. He makes fun of some of their practices and quirks in a very humorous and gentle way. Jesse Michaels has stories which link with the Eurasians. So I think we have to recognize that Indians come from various parts. Malaysian Indians come from various parts of the Indian subcontinent, and therefore I wouldn't want to homogenize them. I think everyone has their own individual heritage. Even when I write, I talk about Tamil Nadu, where my great-grandparents came from and grandparents came from. So different writers, different Indian writers will bring their different cultural heritage into their stories and in their writings.
So we will end today's session with these words, sir. It's from Hossein sir from Bangladesh. So words of praise. It's not a question.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you found it useful. I just want to share my contact details. I'm not sure whether you can see it, but I have a website and Facebook and email contact. Which, if you want to contact me, you're most welcome to contact me there.
Yes, it's
Okay. So thank you very much. It's been very.
invite audience. Yes, sir. Now I invite I would like to request our research Chakraborty for the formal vote of thanks to our today. Risha?
Yes, sir. Hello, sir.
Hi,
Hello, sir. Good evening, sir.
good evening.
Yes, may I start now, sir?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. First of all, I wish a very good evening to all of one. Today, my words are not really amazing enough to express my gratitude. On behalf of the entire fraternity of my college, Midnapore College Autonomous, I, Trisha Chakraborty, student of UG 4th SEM, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to our estimable chief guest, Malachi Edwin Vethamani sir, who graced us with his thought-provoking address, set a perfect platform for us. I would also like to thank our respected principal sir, Dr. G.C. Bera, for his enormous support, who radiated a source of energy within us. My heartfelt thanks goes out to our adorable HOD Professor Tanmoy Kundu sir, who always stand by us, guide us, lead us, and motivate us. Thank you, sir, for making our lockdown period really very fruitful and enjoyable. Last but not the least, I thank all the participants across India for showing their interest in this program. Once again, thank you very much to all who assembled here today. Please stay safe and stay pretty. Thank you. That's all, sir.